Welcome to Curious Nightmares, the channel where your fears and deepest curiosities collide. Prepare for spine-tingling tales and eerie explorations into the supernatural. Subscribe and stay tuned for hair-raising stories.
Losing my job turned my world upside down, landing me back in the last place I ever expected to be, my childhood home. Now, I'm camped out in the basement of my mom's house, tucked away in a small town that feels like a different planet compared to the bustling city life I'm used to. This basement, once a teenage hideout brimming with dreams, has become a stifling box, its walls seeming to creep closer with each passing day. It's strange how a place filled with old memories can suddenly feel so unfamiliar and suffocating. My mom, Eliza, and I used to be close, but now there's a distance between us. She's trying, maybe too hard, to connect, to fill the silence that's grown between us since I returned. I appreciate her efforts, I do, but it only serves to remind me of how far I've fallen. She's been alone since Dad passed away during the pandemic, and I can tell she's glad to have me back. My days blur into a repetitive cycle of gaming and mindless internet browsing, a poor attempt to escape the crushing weight of my reality. This basement feels more like a prison than a home. Each day here is the same as the last. The energy and chaos of the city life I've lost seem like a distant dream. Time drags on endlessly in this small town, and I feel stuck, trapped in a life I never wanted. Lying here in the dim light of my computer screen, I feel more disconnected than ever, not just from the world outside, but from my mom too. It's during one of those endless nights, as I aimlessly wander the darker corners of the internet, that I come across something that catches my eye, an offer on the dark web that promises power, control, and maybe a way to hit back at the world that's knocked me down. Little did I know, this moment of curiosity would be the first step into a nightmare that would turn my life upside down. The descent into the dark web started as a curiosity, a way to kill time in the endless monotony of my basement existence. But that night, as I clicked through layers of the internet most never see, I stumbled upon something that piqued my interest, a site selling what they claimed was a box of black magic, capable of exacting revenge on anyone. The idea was absurd, of course. I scoffed at it initially. But as I sat there in the dim glow of my screen, the thought of getting back at Mr. Collins, my former boss who so callously ripped away my livelihood, began to take root. The man who made my life miserable, who took credit for my hard work, and then discarded me like yesterday's news. The thought of him suffering even a fraction of what I had been through brought a twisted comfort. So in a moment of weakness, fueled by resentment and a sense of powerlessness, I ordered the box. The transaction was anonymous, untraceable, or so I believed. I convinced myself it was just a silly impulse buy, a moment of madness in the small hours of the night. But deep down, I felt a stirring of something dark, a dangerous anticipation. That night, after my dark web detour, sleep was elusive. When it finally came, it was anything but restful. I found myself in a foggy nightmare, the details hazy, but the fear palpable. In the dream, I was in the basement, but it felt different, charged with a menacing presence. A shadowy figure seemed to be lurking in the corner, watching me. Waking up with a start, my shirt soaked in sweat, my heart racing, I realized it was just a dream. Or was it? The room was pitch black, the silence oppressive. Fumbling for the light switch, I half expected to see someone or something, but there was nothing. Just the familiar clutter of my basement. Trying to shake off the unease, I headed upstairs to the kitchen. The quiet of the house was a stark contrast to the chaos of my dream. I poured myself a glass of orange juice, the coolness of the drink a small comfort. That's when I heard it. Footsteps coming down from the second floor. "Mom?" I called out. No response. The footsteps stopped as abruptly as they had started. A chill ran down my spine. I left the glass in the sink and walked cautiously towards the stairs. Peeking up, I saw nothing. Just the empty hallway leading to my mom's room. I crept upstairs, finding her asleep, undisturbed by the night's strangeness. Heading back to the basement, I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. The stress, the games, the late nights, they were messing with me. But as I lay back down, the image of the shadowy figure from my nightmare lingered in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. A few days blurred past since that weird night. Nothing much changed except the eerie feeling that lingered like a bad smell. I tried to lose myself in games and random internet dives, but that nightmare and those strange sounds kept replaying in my head. Then it happened. I was mindlessly gaming in the basement when I heard a thud at the side door. At first I ignored it, thinking it was just the wind or some animal, but curiosity got the better of me. I paused my game and went to check. There it was, a package wrapped in sleek black paper with a velvet bow sitting right outside. My heart raced. This had to be the dark web box. I brought it inside, feeling a mix of excitement and dread. It was heavier than I expected. I set it on the coffee table and just stared at it. It looked so out of place in my dingy basement. Mom shouted down, asking about the noise, but I just mumbled some excuse. I was alone again, just me and this mysterious box. Despite every horror story screaming in my head, I couldn't resist. I untied the bow and tore off the paper. Inside was a smaller wooden box, old and carved with weird symbols. It felt like the air in the room got heavier as I opened it. Inside, there were some strange things. A small, creepy-looking doll with buttons for eyes, a bunch of candles, and a tattered old book. The book was weird. It had all these strange words, some sort of incantations, and a few crude drawings. Some of it was in English, but it didn't make much sense. Something about revenge and a warning that using this stuff could have consequences. I spent the rest of the night just staring at the box and its contents. I kept thinking about my old boss, Mr. Collins, and how he'd wronged me. Part of me wanted to use whatever this stuff was on him, but another part, a more rational part, was screaming that this was a bad idea. I didn't sleep much that night. The box sat there on the table like a dark invitation. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those weird symbols and the doll's button eyes. I had this sinking feeling that I'd just opened a door to something I wouldn't be able to close. A couple of nights later, things got weirder. I was up late, the glow of my computer screen the only light, when I started hearing these faint whispers. At first I thought it was just the game or some video I'd left running, but when I paused everything, the whispers were still there. They were so quiet, I could barely make them out, but they were definitely real. I tried to brush it off, focus on my game, but the whispers just got louder. It was like they were coming from right behind me. I spun around, half expecting to see someone standing there, but the room was empty, just my usual mess and the dim light from the screen. The next day, everything seemed normal, but as soon as night came, the whispers returned, like someone was murmuring right in my ear. I couldn't understand what they were saying, but it sent chills down my spine. That's when things started moving on their own. I'd find my stuff not where I left it, and once, one of my posters just fell off the wall for no reason. I even thought I saw shadows moving in the corners of the room, but every time I looked directly at them, there was nothing there. I wasn't sleeping much, and when I did, I had these intense, messed up dreams. Dreams where I was being chased by something I couldn't see, something that was always just a step behind me. One night, the whispers got so loud, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the box from under my bed and opened it. The weird doll, the candles, and that creepy book, they all looked so harmless in the light. But I knew they weren't. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to get rid of the box, throw it away, and forget about all this. But another part was scared of what might happen if I did. The whispers, the shadows, the feeling of being watched, it was all getting too much. I was starting to think that maybe I'd made a huge mistake, messing with stuff I didn't understand. And the worst part was, I had no idea how to fix it. The sense of dread in the basement was growing each night since the box arrived. I could feel the shadows pressing in closer, as if they were alive. It was more than just the whispers now. There were noises, strange creaks and groans that seemed to come from the walls themselves. One night, I was jolted awake by the sound of something heavy dragging across the floor. Heart pounding, I sat up, straining my eyes in the darkness. The room was still, but the air felt charged, electric. I reached for my phone to use as a flashlight, and that's when I saw it, a shadow, darker than the surrounding darkness, moving along the wall. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The shadow moved with purpose, almost like it was searching for something. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished. I was left sitting there in the dark, shaking, not sure if what I saw was real or just a trick of my mind. The next day was a blur. I couldn't focus on anything, couldn't shake the image of that shadow. It was like the box had opened a door to something sinister, and now I couldn't close it. The whispers were constant now. a low murmur in the background of my thoughts. That evening, things escalated. I was downstairs trying to distract myself with a game when the temperature dropped sharply. The room went ice cold in a matter of seconds. My breath fogged in the air, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. I felt something brush against my neck like cold fingers tracing down my skin. I spun around, but there was nothing there. The sense of being watched was overwhelming. It felt like there were eyes on me from every corner of the room. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the box and the book, thinking I could find a way to reverse whatever I had started. But the book was no help. The words seemed to dance on the pages, refusing to make sense. That night, the nightmares were worse than ever. I dreamt of being trapped in the basement, the shadows closing in, whispering my name. I woke up gasping for air, the room so cold I could see my breath. I knew I had to get rid of the box, but I was terrified of what might happen if I did. It felt like I was caught in a web, and the more I struggled, the tighter it wound around me. The box had brought something into my home, something dark and malevolent, and now I was paying the price. Every day since the box arrived, the basement, my once comfortable retreat, had turned into a den of shadows and whispers. It felt like the walls were closing in, the darkness taking on a life of its own. The air grew colder, heavier, filled with a sense of foreboding that I couldn't escape. The whispers became a constant background noise, a cacophony of hissing voices that never quite formed into coherent words. It was like they were teasing me, always just out of reach of understanding. I tried to drown them out with games, music, anything, but they persisted, seeping into every moment of silence. One night, the game I was playing suddenly glitched, the screen flickering wildly. In the distorted display, I caught a glimpse of something, a figure looming behind me. I spun around, heart hammering in my chest, but there was nothing there. When I turned back, the screen was normal again, as if nothing had happened. But things got even weirder. I started hearing my mom's voice, calling me from upstairs, her tone distorted and unnatural. It sent chills down my spine. I rushed upstairs, only to find her sound asleep. The house was silent, but for the sound of my own ragged breathing. Sleep became a rare commodity. I'd lie awake, staring into the darkness, watching the shadows dance on the walls. The whispers grew louder at night, a chorus of unintelligible chatter that filled the room. The cold was relentless, seeping into my bones, a chill that no blanket could ward off. I knew I had to do something about the box. It was clear that it was no ordinary object. It had unleashed something malevolent and unrelenting. I decided to get rid of it, to try and put an end to this nightmare. The next day, I grabbed the box and the book, determined to dispose of them. Burning them seemed too risky, like it might release whatever was contained within. So I opted to bury them, hoping that would sever whatever connection had been formed. I chose a spot deep in the woods behind the house, a place rarely visited, shrouded in overgrown foliage. The ground was hard, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. As I dug, the whispers grew louder, more frantic. It was as if they were protesting, trying to stop me. Finally, I placed the box and the book in the hole and began to cover them with dirt. But as I did, a feeling of dread washed over me. It felt like I was being watched, the gaze of unseen eyes heavy on my back. I looked around, half expecting to see a figure standing among the trees, but there was nothing, just the rustling of leaves in the wind. I finished burying the box and hurried back to the house, the feeling of being watched never leaving me. That night, the basement felt different, emptier, but the sense of unease remained. The shadows seemed to retreat slightly. The whispers lessened, but the damage had been done. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, that whatever I had unleashed was still lurking, waiting. As the days passed, the house seemed to settle back into its old rhythm, but the memories of those nights stayed with me. I couldn't escape the feeling that something had changed fundamentally. The basement, once a place of solace, now felt tainted, a constant reminder of the darkness I had dabbled in. The nightmares continued, less frequent but just as vivid. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, images of shadowy figures and whispered threats lingering in my mind. The cold never fully went away, a constant reminder of the presence that had once inhabited the space. I tried to move on, to return to some semblance of normalcy, but it was impossible to forget. The experience had left a mark, a shadow that followed me, a whisper in the back of my mind. I knew deep down that the box's curse was still entwined with me, a dark chapter of my life that I couldn't just bury and forget. In the days following the burial of the box, the basement, once my safe haven, remained a place of discomfort and unease. The shadows seemed to linger longer, and the cold, although not as biting, still hung in the air like a bad memory. The whispers had quieted down, but the silence they left behind was just as unsettling. I started spending less time in the basement, trying to distance myself from the remnants of the nightmare I had unleashed. But no matter where I went in the house, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was like the presence from the basement had seeped into the very walls of the house. One evening, as I sat in the living room trying to read, I heard it again, the faintest whisper, coming from the direction of the basement. My heart skipped a beat. I had hoped that burying the box would end this, but it seemed I was wrong. The whispers were back, only now they sounded different, more desperate, more urgent. I tried to ignore them, but they grew louder, impossible to drown out. It was like they were calling to me, beckoning me back to the basement. Against my better judgment, I found myself drawn back down those familiar steps. The basement was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the computer screen. The whispers grew louder as I descended, a cacophony of voices that filled the room. I flicked on the light, half expecting to see something manifest before me, but there was nothing, just the familiar sight of my old refuge, now a source of dread. That night, the dreams returned with a vengeance. I was back in the basement, surrounded by shadows, the whispers echoing around me. But this time, there was something else, a figure, shrouded in darkness, standing just at the edge of my vision. Every time I tried to focus on it, it would fade into the shadows, only to reappear moments later. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing. The dreams were getting more intense, more vivid. It was like the box, although buried, was still exerting its influence, reaching out from its grave to haunt me. The next few days were a blur of sleepless nights and anxious days. I could feel myself growing more paranoid, jumping at the slightest sound, the faintest movement in the corner of my eye. My mom started to notice, asking me if everything was all right. I assured her it was, not wanting to involve her in this nightmare. Then things took a turn for the worse. I started seeing things, shadows moving in the periphery of my vision, figures standing in the corners of rooms, only to disappear when I looked directly at them. The whispers were constant now, a relentless stream of unintelligible murmurs that followed me everywhere. I knew I couldn't live like this, constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows. I needed to find a way to end this once and for all. I decided to go back to the woods, to the spot where I had buried the box, and see if there was something I had missed, some clue as to how to break this curse. As I approached the spot, a sense of dread filled me. The ground where I had buried the box was undisturbed, but the air felt charged, heavy with anticipation. I started digging, the earth cold and damp under my fingers. When I finally reached the box, I hesitated. Did I really want to open this Pandora's box again? But I knew I had no choice. I needed answers. I opened the box, and a rush of cold air hit me. Inside, everything was just as I had left it. The doll, the candles, the book. But as I flipped through the pages of the book, something caught my eye. A passage I hadn't noticed before. A warning about the consequences of inviting darkness into your life and the price of trying to control it. I knew then that this wasn't going to end until I found a way to close that gateway, to sever the connection I had unwittingly forged. But as I stood there, in the chilling silence of the woods, with the whispers echoing in my mind, I couldn't help but wonder if it was already too late. After that day in the woods, it hit me hard. I hadn't just found some weird box online. I had opened a door to something way darker than I could have imagined. The house felt different now. Every creak and groan seemed louder, more sinister. And the basement, my once favorite hangout, now felt like a pit of shadows, whispering secrets in a language I couldn't understand but felt deep in my bones. I knew I had to do something, anything, to fix this. I pored over the cryptic book, trying to decipher its warnings and rituals. It felt like wading through a swamp, each word heavier and more dangerous than the last. I had no idea what half of it meant, but I knew I was running out of time. The air was charged with a tension, like a storm was about to break right over our house. Things started getting really messed up. I'd see things move out of the corner of my eye, hear my name whispered from empty rooms, and the cold, It was like winter had settled in the house, creeping into every corner. Mom was getting worried. I could see it in her eyes, but how could I tell her that I had brought this nightmare upon us? One night, it all came to a head. I woke up to those whispers, louder, more urgent than they'd ever been. Then came this growl, deep and guttural, vibrating through the entire room. I felt something grab my ankle, cold and strong. I thrashed and kicked until I was free, but the room, it was a whirlpool of shadows, like they were alive, angry. I grabbed the book and the box and bolted to the basement. If there was any chance of ending this, it was now. I set up the candles, just like the book said, and started the incantation. The words felt alien, heavy, and as I spoke them, the room turned ice cold. The shadows recoiled with every word I said, the whispers turning into screams. The whole room shook, stuff flying off shelves, lights flickering like crazy. It was like the darkness itself was fighting back, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. With the last word of the incantation, everything went eerily silent. Then this blinding light just exploded in the room. I felt something rush past me, a wind that wasn't there before. When the light died down, it was quiet, peaceful almost. The candles were out, the book open on the floor. The heaviness in the air was gone. I sat there completely spent, hoping against hope that it was over. But even in that silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. I had stirred something up with that box, something that wouldn't be so easily put back to sleep. The shadows might have retreated, but they had left their mark, and I knew, deep down, that the echoes of this darkness would linger, a haunting reminder of the gateway I had carelessly opened. In the days following the ritual, there was a deceptive calm. The basement was quiet, the whispers had ceased, and the air no longer carried that bone-chilling cold. Yet something felt off. It was like the quiet after a storm, where you're not sure if it's really over or just a brief respite before it starts again. I tried to get back to normal, to lose myself in games and movies, but the shadows in the basement still felt too dense, too watchful. It was as if they were waiting, biding their time. And every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of something, a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, a brief rustle that was gone as quickly as it appeared. Mom noticed the change in me. She kept asking if I was okay, her eyes full of concern. I assured her everything was fine, but we both knew I was lying. The house, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. One evening, as I sat in the basement, I heard it, a faint, almost inaudible whisper. My heart stopped. I listened, holding my breath, but it was gone as quickly as it came. I told myself it was just my imagination, the remnants of the terror that box had brought into our lives. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. The dream started up again, less frequent but just as vivid. I would find myself in the basement, surrounded by darkness, with a sense of something just beyond my sight, watching me, waiting. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, the feeling of unseen eyes still upon me. I became paranoid, jumping at the smallest sounds, avoiding the basement as much as possible. But it didn't matter where I went. The feeling followed me, a constant reminder of the darkness I had dabbled in. One night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I heard a noise from the basement. It was different this time, not a whisper, but a soft thud, like something heavy had been dropped. I lay there, frozen, not daring to move. The house was silent, but the urge to go down and check was overwhelming. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. I crept to the basement, each step feeling heavier than the last. As I reached the bottom, I flicked on the light. The room was exactly as I had left it, but there, in the center of the floor, was the box. It was open, its contents spilled out, as if it had been waiting for me. My heart raced. I had buried that box deep in the woods. How had it found its way back? I stared at it, a mix of fear and disbelief washing over me. The whispers started again, louder now, a cacophony of voices that filled the basement. I knew then that it wasn't just a box or a collection of items. It was a portal, a connection to something ancient and malevolent. And it wasn't done with me yet. As I stood there, the whispers growing louder, I realized that this was just the beginning. The darkness had rooted itself in my home, in my life, and it was going to take more than a ritual to get rid of it. The return of the box to my basement was a wake-up call. Whatever I had unleashed wasn't just lurking in the shadows anymore. It was becoming bolder, more tangible. The whispers that filled the basement were now constant, a maddening chorus that seemed to mock my every attempt to ignore them. Sleep was a distant memory. Each night, the shadows in my room seemed to move, forming shapes and figures that disappeared when I tried to focus on them. It was like living in a perpetual state of nightmare, one I couldn't wake up from. Mom was terrified. She could feel the change in the house, the oppressive weight of something unseen. Her once warm and comforting presence turned into one of fear and confusion. She didn't understand what was happening, and I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth. Then, one night, something changed. The whispers in the basement turned into a loud, cacophonous chant. It felt like the house itself was vibrating with the sound. I crept downstairs, a growing sense of dread in my stomach. The basement was dark, the only light coming from the eerie glow of the box. As I approached, the chanting grew louder, more insistent. I reached out to close the box, but before I could touch it, the room went ice cold. A shadow detached itself from the wall, forming into a figure that was both there and not there, a wraith made of darkness. I backed away, my mind racing. This couldn't be happening. It was like a nightmare, but I was wide awake. The figure followed, a constant presence, just at the edge of my vision. I ran upstairs, the figure's words echoing in my head. I had to find a way to close the gateway, to get rid of the darkness. But as I sat there, trying to piece together a plan, I heard something that froze my blood. It was Mom's voice, but it was coming from the basement, calling me, beckoning me back down. But I knew it wasn't her. Whatever was down there was trying to lure me back, to trap me. I was at a loss. The darkness had grown too strong, too cunning. And as I sat there, grappling with the reality of my situation, a chilling realization dawned on me. I had become a prisoner in my own home, ensnared by a shadow that I had naively unleashed. The mimicry of my mother's voice coming from the basement was a sinister ploy, a trap set by the darkness to draw me back into its depths. The house, once a haven of warmth and safety, had transformed into a domain of unseen terror. As I stood at the top of the basement stairs, the false calls of my mother echoing up to me, a profound sense of dread settled in my heart. This was more than a haunting. It was a malevolent force that had woven itself into the very fabric of our lives. With each call from the basement, the temptation to respond, to confront whatever lay in the shadows, grew stronger. But I knew that to do so would be to play into the darkness's hands. The final realization hit me like a cold wave. The battle I was fighting might have no end. The gateway I had opened didn't just bridge our world with the shadows, it had brought something into our reality that was now beyond my control. As I stood frozen, caught between fear and the instinct to protect my home, the whispers from below grew louder, more insistent. The darkness was waiting, and I knew that whatever choice I made, it would only be the beginning of a deeper, more terrifying ordeal.